Good afternoon, dearest friends. Welcome. It
I didn't
is
get an email.
Tuesday.
No,
I'm sorry. Oh, you didn't get okay.
I didn't get the email.
Okay. So I'll have to resend it. It
Thank
is Tuesday, March 29th. Wow, where is the time going?
I don't
And
know.
we are in the middle of a story of two dear friends, David and Jonathan. As a matter of fact, they weren't just friends, they were also brothers-in-law, as David, as we discussed last week, marries Michal, Jonathan's sister.
Mm-hmm.
The irony of all this, of course, is because unfortunately, King Saul, who starts out a humble, gracious, loving, benevolent king, a great leader, very devout, spiritual, and devoted, has unfortunately experienced a bout of darkness, of probably today we would give it a diagnosable term, depression, maybe something even more challenging than that. And Jonathan now is obsessing about one thing alone, and that is how to rid the world of David, his son-in-law. David, hero of Israel. David, general. And now Jonathan, in this darkened state, wants to kill David first by trying to manufacture a mistake, and then trying to send him out to battle, and then challenging him to present trophies from a number of defeated Philistine warriors in an attempt to cause him to do things that are dangerous and foolish. And ultimately, David survives all this. And then we read last week that King Saul sends troops to catch David, and initially they are swept up in a euphoric prophetic experience, which eventually even seizes Saul himself. Then at a later date, he sends soldiers to kidnap or to arrest David from his home. His wife, Michal, King Saul's daughter, thwarts that by helping him escape and having a dummy person in the bed. And it's pretty rough. David and Jonathan meet up, and Jonathan said, "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" And David, chapter 20, which is, we actually read a few of the lines, but we'll start here again, where David pours out his heart to Jonathan, and ultimately, well, we'll see what happens next. So let's begin chapter 20, book of Samuel, verse 1. David flew from Nevayot in Ramah, which is where it's where the prophet Samuel is, and he came to Jonathan. The reason why he fled is because Saul came to Nevayot in Ramah, and now he goes to his brother-in-law, his dear friend. What have I done? What is my crime? What is my guilt against your father that he wants to kill me? So David doesn't get it. David doesn't understand what the hatred's all about. He replied, "Heaven forbid, you're not going to die. My father does nothing great or small without me. He would never conceal this from me. It cannot be." David said, "Actually, Saul knows our relationship, and he will not let you know because he knows how broken and pained you'll be. But as the Lord lives and as you live, there's only one step between me and death." He says, "I am so vulnerable, so much jeopardy." Jonathan says to David, "Whatever you want, I'll do it for you." So Jonathan says, "I'm going to protect you. Whatever you need me to do, I'm going to intervene." And here's what happens next. But first, I want to give you a little introduction. Well, the most important Jewish text is certainly what we might call the Bible, and specifically the 5 books of Moses. So important are the 5 books of Moses that temples, synagogues, shuls across the globe and throughout the ages read a weekly portion of the Bible, of the 5 books of Moses, every single week. Of course, that's the Torah portion, or the Parsha, that we used to discuss before we pivoted into studying the books of Joshua, Judges, and now Samuel. There were times in Jewish history, however, ancient times, where the enemies of Israel, who had authority over the Jewish people, made decrees banning or outlawing the reading of the Torah publicly. And so what were the Jews to do? So they did something very interesting. They created an alternate reading that was not from the 5 books of Moses, that would be read at times where the Bible was outlawed and not available to be read. Where and what were those readings? They collected a series of excerpts from the prophets, the book of Joshua, Samuel, Judges, the later prophets. And so in synagogue today, there are actually 2 readings. There is a reading of the Torah, 5 books of Moses, and then there is a special reading of the prophets. So every Shabbat, there's a special reading from the prophets. In addition to that, on special occasions, there are very specific readings. And whenever Shabbat is the final day of a Jewish month, and the next day is Rosh Chodesh, the new month, there's a special reading in the synagogue from the book of Samuel about Rosh Chodesh. And you know what reading that is? It's the reading we're about to take a look at right now. So these words that we're going to read are actually very well known to folks who hang out in synagogues because it's read several times a year. And here is the story. So David and Jonathan are trying to workshop and figure out a way to help David survive the ire, the wrath, the murderous rage that Saul is feeling against him. So here's what David said. David proposed the following to Jonathan. Tomorrow is the new moon. What is the new moon? The new moon was an indication that it is a new Jewish month, in Hebrew called Rosh Chodesh. And that's actually why Shayna's classes that she teaches every month is called Rosh Chodesh Society, because it's a monthly study and group that's loosely tied to Rosh Chodesh. But in biblical times, Rosh Chodesh was a mini New Year's. It was a day of great celebration. And so apparently every month there would be a feast in the king's palace on Rosh Chodesh. And so David tells Jonathan, tomorrow is the new month. I am meant to sit with the king at the meal. He's the son-in-law. He's in the court. And although Saul hates him and wants to kill him, he's expected to be there. So he says, instead, let me go and hide in the countryside until the 3rd evening. He's going to hide for a few days, not attend Rosh Chodesh. If your father notes my absence, you should say that David asked my permission to run down to his hometown, Bethlehem, for the whole family is having an annual sacrifice. Basically, make up an excuse that David has an excused absence. How is he excused? Because Jonathan will say that David asked his permission. If he says, good, I accept your explanation, this will be an indication that Saul is now no longer in a dark state and David is safe. If he says, good, your servant is safe. But if his anger flares up, if he gets angry, this will be an indication, know that he is resolved to do me harm. So David is now giving a proposal to gauge Saul's temper, to gauge Saul's mood. And then he says, deal faithfully with your servant. Please be worthy of the trust I'm putting in you, since you've taken your servant into the covenant of the Lord with you. And if I'm guilty, kill me yourself. If you think I should die, you kill me. But don't make me go back to your father. Basically, you figure out, and if I'm in danger, keep me from your father. And Jonathan says, come on, David, don't talk like that. If I learn my father's resolve to kill you, I will tell you about it. David asks Jonathan, well, who's going to tell me if your father actually wants to kill me or not? How am I going to know? So Jonathan says to David, we'll both go into the open. And so they go outside. So this may sound confusing, so I want to explain. David and Jonathan have to be careful. David's hiding. Jonathan cannot be clearly colluding with David. And so they're going to need to come up with some kind of code, some kind of trick to be certain to communicate David's status or to communicate what Saul intends to do without implicating Jonathan. So here's what happens next. Jonathan said, hey, let's go outside. And so they go outside. Jonathan tells David, by the Lord, the God of Israel, I'll feel out my father at this time tomorrow or on the 3rd day. And if his response is favorable, I'll send a message to you at once and this close to you. if Saul is no longer out for blood, I'll send you a message and you can come back. But if my father intends to do you harm, I swear that I will disclose it to you and make sure they send you off to escape unharmed. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father.
Mm.
These are powerful words. Jonathan says,
Yeah.
basically, may you have the fortune that my father once was worthy of. This is a real, deep friendship. Nor shall you fail to show me the Lord's faithfulness. I'm going to be faithful to you and you be kind to me while I'm alive and when I'm dead. Basically, Jonathan is asking that David reciprocate in deep friendship. Shall you ever discontinue your faithfulness to my house, not even after the Lord has wiped out every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth? He's basically trying to say that they'll have an eternal commitment to one another, a friendship, and of a covenant of sorts. And on that day, Jonathan made a covenant, an agreement with the house of David that God should protect David from his enemies. Jonathan, out of his love for David, adjured him again, for he loved him. So they were truly, truly dear friends. So dear was their friendship that when Jewish tradition wants to hold up a selfless model for friendship, they talk about David and Jonathan.
Mhm.
Because many times a friendship, although it could be a friendship, there are certain contractual expectations from one another. So sometimes people befriend another person, but not because they like the person exclusively, but because there's something else that person has that they want to have.
Mm.
Fun, friendship, access, clout. I don't know. There's a lot of different reasons why a person might befriend another person. And actually, I was talking today in Shul with somebody who said I had a friend who became very, very well-to-do, thank God. And he actually was like very down to earth and always sought out people in need and causes in need. And he was saying, it's very rare because unfortunately, many times people of means have a hard time discerning if a friendship is about friendship or it's because people are hoping for one of the perks of being in their sphere to ride in their private jet or
Right.
go to the country club or whatever. And so unfortunately, there are friendships that are based on something more than just two people enjoying each other's company. That's a disappointing kind of friendship, and we hope to move past those kind of relationships that are just about using. So they're held up as a model of two individuals who had very little incentive to look after each other. David is Jonathan's competition. If David's not there, Jonathan might be the next king. He was the crown prince. And so Jonathan has a lot to lose by befriending David. And David as well. Jonathan is the son of a person who's seeking to destroy him, represents a threat. And so the friendship certainly is not based on anything more than deep mutual respect and appreciation for each other. And so that's why this is such a model of deep friendship.
Right.
Ironically, it's not as hard to find an example of a flawed friendship. That's a dime a dozen. All right, so let's see what happens next. So Jonathan actually recaps. So remember what happened. David comes running to Jonathan and said, hey, why is your dad after me? Jonathan says, my dad's not after you. And David says, actually he is, and maybe he's keeping it from you. So Jonathan says, I will do whatever you want to help figure things out. David gives a proposal. He says, you'll go to the meal without me, and depending on Saul, the king's reaction to my absence, we'll know if he's forgiven me or if he still wants to hurt me. And then you'll let me know. So Jonathan now recaps the proposal in the following. So it sounds a little repetitive, but we're reading through the book of Samuel. So let's take a look. So Jonathan recaps and says, yes, agreed. We are going to be committed to one another as friends, regardless of what happens. And here's what I'm going to do. Tomorrow will be the new month, Rosh Chodesh, and there's going to be a celebration. And you're going to be noticed that you're absent. You'll be missed when your seat remains empty. So after tomorrow, go down all the way to the place where we used to meet up, their hiding place, and stay close to the Etzel stone, or the Azal stone. Hide, somewhere that I'll know where to find you. Now, how is Jonathan going to get the message across? Jonathan cannot be seen by Saul's agents as fraternizing or befriending or hanging out with the enemy. So here's what he's going to do. I'll shoot 3 arrows to one side of it, pretending that I'm just practicing my target, doing target practice. And I'll tell the boy to go find the arrows. If I tell the boy, hey, the arrows are on this side of you, then that's a sign that you can come out, you're safe. So if he says, hey, the arrows are right there on the side, you'll know that all is good. But if instead I say, hey, the arrows are behind you, then you better run, because it means that trouble is brewing. As for the promise we made each other, may the Lord be witness between you and me forever. So the covenant is an agreement, the force of God's name. And even if no one else was there to witness it, God, who is eternal, will attest and enforce this agreement. And so David does as suggested. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. The king took his usual place on the seat by the wall. He's sitting at the head table. Jonathan rose. Abner sat down next to David at Saul's side, and David's seat was empty. So Abner was a general, and also, if you recall, Saul's uncle or cousin, right? David's place is empty. That day, Saul said, maybe he has a good excuse. But the second day of Rosh Chodesh, or the second night, David's place was empty again. So Saul says to his son, hey, Jonathan, why didn't the son of Jesse come to the meal yesterday or today? Is he avoiding me? So Jonathan says, David begged me to go to Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, for we're going to have a family feast. In our town, my brothers have summoned me to do it. We're going to have a family reunion. And so this is what Jonathan's telling his dad. Do me a favor, he asked. Let me slip away to my kinsman. And that's why he's not at the table.
Rabbi, I have one little question to ask.
Go ahead.
How many days or nights does this Rosh Chodesh feast last?
Rosh Chodesh is typically 1 or 2 days.
Okay, thank
depending
you.
on the particular circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So King Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan. Exactly the reaction we were hoping not to see. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, he shouted. I know that you side with the son of Jesse, to your shame and the shame of your mother's nakedness. Very strong, graphic expression of how disappointed Saul is at Jonathan for the crime of befriending enemy states, enemy number 1. Why does Saul hate David? So this is a very insightful and informative line. Joy, I'm sure you're waiting for this line.
Yes, I am, breathlessly.
Verse 31. What's wrong with David? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, as long as David is alive, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. You're not going to be able to inherit the throne.
Aye.
And so Saul is extremely jealous and realizes that David is the competition. Saul is not only thinking about his own life, but the honor, the prestige, the career of his son Jonathan.
Aye.
And so David is saying, you are fraternizing with the enemy, and you are helping engineer your downfall.
Aye.
Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death. Saul has become paranoid, a little unstable, dark and depressed. A very sad way to see such a special, royal, glorious person. But Jonathan spoke up, and he said to his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done wrong? He pushes back, hoping to defend his dear friend. At that, Saul threw his spear at him to strike him down. Jonathan realized that his father was determined to do away with David. When the guy who's enraged at David is all concerned about his son's future, is in such a blind fury that he's willing to possibly hurt his son,
Aye.
Jonathan realized this is a very, very dark and impossible situation. Now Jonathan's turn is to rise from the table in rage. He ate no food on the second day of the new moon. He was grieved about David, and his father humiliated him. So Saul doesn't just lash out at David, but he lashes out at Jonathan. In a way, it doesn't seem Jonathan was expecting. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the open for the meeting with David, accompanied by his young boy. He said to the boy, "Run ahead, find the arrows I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shot the arrows past him. When the boy came to the place where the arrows shot by Jonathan had fallen, Jonathan tells the boy, "Hey, the arrows are beyond you." And then Jonathan tells the boy, "Hurry up, don't stop." And so he had him gathering the arrows and came back to his master. But the boy had no idea that there was a secret code going on. The boy suspected nothing. Only David and Jonathan knew the arrangement. And the arrangement was that if he says the arrows are beyond you, it means real big trouble.
No
And
good.
indeed, Jonathan knows trouble is here.
Aye.
So Jonathan hands his gear to the boy and says, "Okay, go back home. Go back to town." When the boy got there, David emerged from the concealment of the Negev. He flung his face on the ground and bowed low 3 times. They kissed each other and wept together. David wept along. So Jonathan realizes this is a terrible, terrible situation to be in. David is so grateful that his friend saved him. And they're both, Shammai, come on over. Because realize how selfless Jonathan is being here. To literally gamble his own future, to practically gamble his life away to protect
Right.
his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Not to protect his friend who's become his brother.
Right.
Jonathan tells David, "Go in peace." So Jonathan could be the enforcer of his father's law. And by the way, to clarify, in the biblical concept of a monarchy, a king had a lot of latitude when it came to life and death of his subjects. And if the king suspected a rebellion, a king had the ability and the right legally to impose extreme sentences, including death, extrajudicially. And so Saul may have been within his legal rights to take anyone's life. Certainly, this was not within his moral prerogative, and Jonathan is intervening. And so Jonathan tells David, "Go in peace, for we've sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, that may the Lord be witness between us, that neither of us will harm the other, between your offspring and mine forever." So tragically, this is not a happy ever after story. This is a story where Saul's demons got the best of him. The happy part of the story is the noble nature of Jonathan and his willingness to put everything on the line to protect his friend.
Mm-hmm.
That, of course, is the beautiful part of this painful episode. And this concludes chapter 20. So what do you do? What do you do if you're David? What do you do if you're Jonathan? Where do you go? The king is after you. The most powerful authority, the most powerful force in the world is against you. That's rough. And so we're going to see what David does. And I just need to warn you, this story gets more disappointing before it gets better.
Aye.
Because now David is on the run.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you go if you're wanted by the king?
Has David's wife petitioned her father?
Yeah, we read already last week and this week how David's wife intervenes and spares him from his soldiers. And now David's brother-in-law and dear friend Jonathan stands up for him. And that might be why Jonathan is such a popular name, because Jonathan is the name embodies true nobility.
It's my son's middle name. It's
see?
my son's middle name.
You
Jonathan.
chose a wonderful name for your son.
Yes. I
And
love him.
it's a very meaningful, rich, noble name. Person that has a lot of depth and bravery. And we're going to see there's more. So David goes home. Not he goes home. David runs off. Jonathan goes home. Now, if you're David, where do you go? So David thinks, who are the most moral, idealistic people who might not immediately hand me in? And so David went to the priest called Achimelech in Nob. Nob is where the tabernacle and the Mishkan and the ark is currently stationed. Avimelech came out to David in alarm. And he said, why are you alone? No one's with you. Remember, David's a big general. David is himself a whole macher. So this priest is used to seeing King David with a entourage. And obviously, if he's coming all by himself, something is amiss. David answered the priest honestly. No, dishonestly. He can't give an honest answer. The king ordered me on a mission. He said, no one must know about the mission I'm in. I'm sending you for which I've given you orders. So I have directed my young men to another place. So David can't say the king is after me or the priest will not be able to take him in. So David has to give he has to be a little flexible with the truth. This is a life and death situation, but that it is what it is. And then he said, do you have anything on hand? Do you have any bread? I need to have them. Whatever's available. Remember, David's been hiding. He's probably hungry. His health is in jeopardy. So the priest said, I have no ordinary bread on hand, only holy bread, provided the young men who are extra judicial about purity, meaning people that were not intimate. In reply to the priest, David said, I assure you that we are in an ideal state of purity. Even the journals, again, I want to pass over the obscure nuance of biblical purity, but even if the journey was a common one, the vessels of the men were consecrated, all the more we may, basically he's saying, I am in a pure state, I can eat that bread. So the priest gave him holy consecrated bread because there was none there except the bread of display, which had been removed from the presence of the Lord to be replaced by warm bread as soon as it was taken away. Long story short, David has to tell a little bit of a flexible, he has to be flexible with the truth. His life is in danger, and he eats some of the bread of the priests. And one of Saul's officials was there that day, praying before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman. Then David says to Achimelech, do you have a sword or a spear in hand? I didn't take my sword or any of my weapons because the king's mission was urgent. The priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you slew in the valley of Elah, is over there wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want to take that one, take it, because there's none besides for it. David said, there is no sword like it. Give it to me. Realize again that the high priest is still assuming that David is an honored general and member of the king's court.
Right.
That day, David continued on his flight from Saul, and he travels all the way into a neighboring territory. He comes to the kingdom of King Achish of Gath. I believe King Achish would have been a minor king in the Philistine Confederacy. So this would have been so he was a minor king, but he ran to the kingdom of Achish, king of Gath. Now all the servants of Achish say to him, why? That's David, king of the land. He's the one that they sing that he's killed tens of thousands. David is enemy number one. He's in the post office on a poster. These words worried David, and he became very afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he pretended to be crazy. He concealed his good senses from them. He feigned madness for their benefit. He scratched marks on the doors of the gates and let his saliva run down his beard. Which this is very interesting to get a biblical picture of what a person who unfortunately was unbalanced may have looked like. And so David has to put on this show. You know why? Because if he was well, he would be a trophy. But now that he's crazy, No one really, there's no honor in killing a person that's not well. So
Really?
Achish asked his servants, you see the man is raving. Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to rave for me? I'm going to bring another Meshugana into my house? The commentaries say that tragically, this king's own wife and daughter had some kind of mental illness. And so he was particularly traumatized by this kind of condition. And maybe David wisely realized that and played up his cards. So what we've seen is that you have young David who turns into warrior leader David, who now, while on the run, has turned into a very sly and calculating David. We might say this is David of the CIA, who has to now disguise himself and use different forms of manipulation to subsist and to continue on a mission, which objective one of his mission was survive to live another day, and then everything else that comes after. This concludes chapter 21, one of the most painful chapters. It's the story of David on the run, David alone in the world, needing to abandon his honor, perhaps even abandon his adherence to truth just to survive. Of course, Judaism understands that human life is a top priority. And so to survive, a person may have some license or latitude with what they say or what they eat, or certain ideals can be waived for the purpose of subsistence.
Preserving life.
Preserving life is a paramount virtue in Judaism. But one could nonetheless not help but feel bad for David to have to resort to this kind of behavior. It must have bothered him. We're now going to continue David's run, David on the run, David the fugitive, so David the shepherd, David the king, David the warrior, David at the royal court, and now David the fugitive. Chapter 22. Right? So if we had to write a book, a biography of David, we could give each chapter another state of being that David was in. And so David now was able to escape the kingdom of Gath. He departed from there and he escapes to a cave, which is in a place called Adullam. And then his brothers and father's family hear that he's there. And so they join him there, which is interesting. Because if you recall, in his youth, he was the black sheep. He was the one who they didn't even invite to the party. But now they all come to see him. And everyone was very upset. And anybody who was in debt, and everyone who was desperate to join him, and he became their leader, and 400 men with him. So realize not everybody was thrilled with King Saul. And there were many people who may have felt a greater degree of alliance with King David. Well, he's not a king yet. And so David on the run ends up launching his career as an independent leader. And so 400 different people, family, and people that their interests are aligned with King David now join him. And now David's got a little pack. He's got a, I don't know, is pack the right word, but he's got a pack of, he's got a band of men around him. David went from there to the Mitzpeh of Moab. He then takes his group of people and he approaches the people of Moab and tells the king of Moab, let my father and mother come stay with you until I know what the God will do to me. Because realize in this world, probably not only David is in danger, but his household is in danger. Because there may be some kind of collective punishment. Saul is crazy. And so the problem with a crazy person is you don't know the limits. You don't know if there are any limits in what he's willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so although David knows that he's destined to be king, he doesn't know exactly the journey that it's going to take. And he doesn't want to lose anyone on the way. And so he has his family hunker down in the kingdom of Moab. And so he leads them to the king of Moab and they stay with him as long as David remained in the Mitzudah, in the fortress.
Hello?
Yes, no, I'm sorry. I was just taking a look at a reference of it.
Okay, it's all right.
And so for now, David has his family held up. But the prophet God told David, so apparently a prophet either was part of his entourage or came to see him. A prophet, of course, being sent by God. Don't stay in the stronghold. Go at once to the territory of Judah. So he goes there. He thinks he has a place to hide. But the prophet tells him, you got to run. Leave this place. So David left. He went into the forest of Chereth. And when Saul heard that David and his men had been located, because David took his men with him, Saul was then in a place called Gibeah. We've met it a bunch of times, sitting under a tree, spear in hand, with all of his servants with him. Saul said to his courtiers, to his servants standing with him, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give vines and fields and vineyards to every one of you? Will he make all of you captains of thousands or tens of thousands? Saul is using some good old-fashioned manipulation. You guys are on my team. You think David is going to treat you nicely when he wins? Has he bribed you? Are you conspiring against me? Again, paranoid speech. Is that why all of you have conspired against me? For no one informs me when my own son made a pact with his son Jesse. No one is concerned for me, and no one informs me when my son has set my servant in ambush against me, as is now happening. And so Saul is really still in a very unhinged state. And he's turning or lashing out at everyone, daring anyone to not be actively protecting him. And here is one of the most tragic, painful, and disappointing few verses in the Bible. Doeg the Edomite, who was among the servants of Saul, got up. And he says, I can tell you, I saw the son of Jesse come to Achimelech, son of Achitub at Nob. He visited the priestly fortress and tabernacle. He inquired of the Lord on his behalf, and he gave him provisions. The high priest gave him spiritual service. He gave him food, and he gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine.
Oh,
Now, everything that Doeg here said is true. But it's a gross crime because knowing how paranoid the king is,
Right.
what do you think Saul is now going to do?
killed.
He is going to kill.
Right.
Thereupon, the king sent for the priest, Achimelech, son of Chitub, and all the priests belonging to his home, and they all came to the king, not knowing anything was wrong.
Right.
Because remember, in their mind, David's part of the team. And Saul said, listen, my son. Listen to me, son of Achitub. Yes, my lord. Again, humble. No sense or desire of being combative. Saul said to him, why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me? You gave him food. You gave him sword. You inquired of God for him. Also that he'll ambush against me, as is happening right now. And so the high priest responds, who is there among all of your servants as trusted as David, your son-in-law? Your son-in-law. He does everything you want of him. He's the most honored person in your home. This is the first time I've inquired of God for him. I've done nothing wrong. Please don't find fault with your servant or any of my family's house, my family, for your servants knew nothing about your what's the word? Paranoia. No, he didn't say it. We didn't know about this friction and this fight. The king said, you shall die, Achimelech. You and all your father's house.
Isn't that awful?
I'm sorry. So this is a priest, a good man. This is a good man
Mm-hmm.
who only wants to help. He
Right.
honored David because David is part of King Saul's family, part of
Mhm.
his court. And now he's going to die. The king commands the guards standing by, turn around, kill the priests of the Lord, for they are in league with David. They knew he was running away. They did not inform me. The king's servants would not raise a hand to strike down the priests of the Lord. Good call.
Good.
Thereupon the king says to Doeg, you Doeg, go strike down the priests. And Doeg the Edomite went and struck down the priest himself. On one day, that day, one man killed 85 priests.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
85 Kohanes.
Ah,
What a terrible crime.
It's a Jew to a Jew. It's terrible.
It
Yes,
sure
what a
was.
terrible crime. And what a sick person to do so. Then it gets worse. Saul then murders the entire town. He puts Nob, town of priests, to the sword. Men, women, children,
ah,
infants, oxen, asses, sheep,
How could
all
God let this happen?
to the sword.
that's horrible.
One son of Achimelech, son of Achituv, escaped. His name was Eviatar, and he fled to David. And by the way, in many ways, this is the point of true no return for Saul. Until now, what did Saul do? He was vengeful, he was jealous, he was paranoid, but to kill
Murder.
any town of your own people, and not only any town, but this is the town of the priests. These are the priests who are representing the Jewish people to God. They're the ones that are bringing the offerings. They are the ones that are living in service of the people and in service of the king. Have all of them killed. This is really the point of absolute no return for King Saul. And here is where it's evident to us and to all that he's really in a very unhealthy place.
That's a high cost that Hashem just kind of stood by and let.
Well, Hashem in general gives a lot of latitude for human beings to be humans.
Yeah.
And the ultimate accounting is in the next world. On occasion, God does intervene, but that's not in the contract of humanity. Only one son of Achimelech escapes. His name was Eviatar. When Eviatar told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord, David said to Eviatar, I knew that day when Doeg Edomite was there, he would tell Saul, I am to blame for all the deaths in your father's house. David here takes the guilt upon himself. Stay with me. Do not be afraid. For whoever seeks your life must seek my life also. It'll be my care to guard you. And so David feels that his job here is to repay the favor of these people.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Where is Jonathan in all of this?
That's
Where
an
is-
interesting
where is
question. I have a
Jonathan?
feeling Jonathan was in a semi-hiding state as well. Remember, his father lashed out at him.
Saul would have killed him.
So I'm going to hope that he wasn't there and there's no mention of his presence. But you're asking a very thoughtful and interesting question. I suspect he was probably trying to lay low.
So he wasn't with them when all
It
this.
does not seem so at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Does not seem so.
Right.
Give me 1 second. So that is the story.
So they don't mention Jonathan here. They don't
Jonathan
say-
is not mentioned over here, but you know what? Let's look in the commentaries. Let's see if anybody talks about Jonathan.
Mhm.
David's wife is just hanging out too.
Well, realize not everyone has the ability to even speak up.
Yeah, but Saul had a lot of his men with him, correct?
Yes.
But not Jonathan. Jonathan is not mentioned at all.
Not that we know about. Jonathan
Right.
is not mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a good question. I cannot, it doesn't say that he was not there, but there's no evidence that he was there.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, the fact that he's not mentioned sounds like it is significant. And again, what a terrible story. So the interesting thing, so again, realize what's happening. David's on the run. Happens to be the only surviving priest that was part of the priestly clan that was active. There were other priests, is now in his camp. And so it may be, I don't know for sure, but it may be that now David has the person that essentially is going to become the high priest.
All the other Kohanim were killed.
the other Kohanim who were in the priestly village. Yeah. So King David now has a very, so let's see, let's do a few lines. We're going to stop in the middle of the story, but I don't want to leave simply on such a down and devastating note. David was told, he gets a report that the Philistines are raiding in a place called Keilah, and he's plundering the threshing floor. So again, the Jewish people have these historic ongoing enmity with the Philistines, and David gets a report that they're harassing the Jewish people. David consults the Lord and asks, should I go attack the Philistines? And the Lord says to David, go attack the Philistines and you will save Keilah.
Okay, but Rabbi, can I ask another question?
Yes.
Did David ever consult the Lord before, or is this something new?
David never had the ability or the authority to consult the Lord before.
Mhm.
It seems like these events, in a sense, have shaken up David to the point where he now feels that it is his job and his responsibility to get involved in a way that he previously didn't feel was right. So until Saul's absolutely trying to kill him, David is trying to stay low. David is not seeking to act as king. But
Mhm.
that's slowly changing as David realizes he has no choice. Because competition turns to jealousy, turns to hatred, turns to an attempted murder. At that point, David there's nothing for David there's no hope to preserve and restore the previous relationship.
Mhm.
So David asked the Lord, and the Lord says, so how does he ask the Lord? He uses the high priest technique of the breastplate, which happens to be Abiathar manages to escape with this important technology when he's on the run. And so David has a powerful,
The high priest is running with him here?
no, the high priest is dead, but the high priest's son
Oh, the son.
manages to escape, one son
Oh,
manages
I
to
see.
escape
Yeah.
with the priestly technology,
Mhm.
Breastplate.
the breastplate. And so David's been saying, look, we're escaping, we're on the run, and we're afraid in our own region. We're going to stick our heads out and go to Keilah. And David again says, hey, God, my men are not so into this. Maybe there's another option. The Lord answers, no. March down at once to Keilah. I'm going to deliver the Philistines into your hands. And realize this is going to be David's first military engagement as an independent chieftain, an independent leader on the run.
Mhm.
David and his men go to Keilah. They fight against the Philistines. He drove off their cattle, inflicted a severe defeat. And thus, David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And so now David is becoming a national hero, even in an independent capacity.
Mhm.
How is this so? When Abiathar, son of Abimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he brought down an ephod. He brought down the priestly garments with him. And so now we understand how he is able to,
Connect with God. Yeah.
yes, in this unique manner.
Right.
What a
Mm.
turn of events. So Saul, in his hateful,
Hey,
murderous,
I don't understand how he was able to talk with God
so
at this point.
when
breastplate.
we discussed the temple ritual of the priests, we described how the high priest wears 8 distinct garments. One of them was a early computer type item. It was called
Right.
the breastplate, and it had on it 12 different stones with different letters. And in a miraculous prophetic kind of way, that breastplate, when they would ask a question, different lights or words or letters would light up, and they would get a message.
Mhm.
This is a very I don't want to say rudimentary because it's using God's technology, but this is an early concept for a computer monitor, the way I see it anyways.
Right.
And so Hashem is sending a text message of sorts to the Jewish people through the priest.
Mhm.
David never was able to do this, but now the default high priest has escaped with this special technology to David.
Mhm.
And so ironically, King Saul, in his attempt to kill David and chase David and his jealousy of David, has now essentially provided King David with an essential piece of technology and clout.
Mm-hmm.
And additionally, he's turning all of the Hebrews against King David. I'm sorry, against King Saul by being a murderer. And he actually chases the high priest now into David's hands. And that's relevant.
Where is that? Where is that described? What verse is that described about the breastplate and
It's
that?
described in the book of Leviticus. I don't have the exact chapter. It's in the Torah portion called Emor. It's in the Bible. Actually, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. It's in Tetzaveh. So it's in the book of, well, it's in a few places, but it's in the book of Exodus. It's referenced in the book of Leviticus. It's described. Yeah. I can pull up for you. I'll try to pull.
And we even saw that breastplate once.
We
Remember
discussed it
that?
once at length
And we
because
saw it, right?
David Kaufman, his brother, was involved in a lawsuit about reclaiming or the provenance or the ownership of a stone that was from that breastplate.
Yeah.
Here, well, I'm if everyone will be patient just for a moment, we're going to here. Exodus 28, or actually even a little earlier. It's Exodus chapter 28, verse. Well, you can start with verse 1. That talks about the special garments. And then starting at verse 6, we talk about the design of the item. And then on verse 10, we talk about the stones. So you can see that there. So again, it's Exodus chapter 28.
Thank you.
Saul was told that David had come to Keilah, and Saul thought, God has delivered him into my hands, for he has shut himself in by entering a town with bars and gates. Saul thinks that David is done because David and his men are now in a city. They've taken over, secured, and protected the city, but now they are contained within its walls. So Saul summons all his troops to go to war, to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. But now David hears he's under attack. Saul's planning to attack him. And so he has the high priest very busy. And once again, they're going to ask Hashem another question. David said, "O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the town because of me. Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me into his hands? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard?" And the Lord said he will. David said, "Will the citizens deliver me into Saul's hands?" And the Lord says they will. So David and his men, 600 now, they've grown by 200, left Keilah at once and moved about wherever they could. When Saul was told that David got away from Keilah, he did not set out. So he held back from going. And so now we're going to stop over here at verse 14, Samuel 23. And we are still a story of David, how do you call it? David on the run. David is a
fugitive.
A fugitive. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. David is a fugitive, but he is already beginning to amass a circle of people, warriors. And this was really the beginning of David's rise. As long as he was in the court, he was in a sense limited. But now that Saul wants to destroy him, that ends up being his great breakout moment. And so, dear friends in life, sometimes it looks like we're being beaten, and really God is helping us transition from the cocoon to be or being a caterpillar to the cocoon to becoming a butterfly. And that's what's happening here with David. He's growing up and he's growing out and he's about to become the man.
Okay, Rabbi, I have one question.
Yes. Thank you, Sean.
This is regarding Rosh Chodesh,
Yes.
the 1 or 2 days of feasting. I'm sure you take part in that, correct?
So actually in contemporary practice, that's not such a thing.
Oh, really? Okay, thank you.
It was more of a biblical thing because there were special offerings that were brought on Rosh Chodesh and they were
I
consumed,
see. Okay.
possibly. So yeah, today Rosh Chodesh is more about prayer. There are
Mhm.
specific prayers, but not exactly a feast of that nature.
Got it. Thank you. Okay.
There are probably those that do have a feast to commemorate and replicate that, but that's not. So yeah. So that's the story today. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting details, and I want to thank you for allowing us to zoom through the story of David, Jonathan, David and King Saul. And again, I think one of the most disturbing narratives, certainly until this point, is the story of the attack and the destruction of the city of Nob and those 85 priests and their families and everything else about them.
Mhm.
And but I hope you'll come back next week so we can continue to see what happens with David on the run. There's going to be one more direct interaction between David and Saul, very symbolic, very moving, and you don't want to miss it. Please join us next week, Tuesday, 1:30.
We will. All right, Rabbi, send me the email about Passover, okay?
God willing, I'll forward it. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Take care. Be well,
Rabbi, why
everyone.
don't
Bye.
you mention this class in your schedule? Every week you
I
give
do.
a schedule,
I think
but you
I do.
never mention this class.
Fell out. I will make a
Hello?
note. Joy, God willing, I'll make sure we'll put
I
it back.
was just curious why you don't mention it
It should
on
be mentioned.
Tuesdays.
I don't know. I used to put in an image for it, but I guess we should, because it's a good class. You're right. We might as well promote it.
You might have.
That's
get more
right.
people. Right, you might get.
It really is a questioning and very educational class, you know. But I was just curious as to why you didn't mention
It
it.
must have. We made like a little advertisement for it. It must have fallen out of because I have a team that like put it together, so it must have fallen out. I'll ask them to.
Okay,
Thank you,
okay.
Joy. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Shira. Thank you, Lynn.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone who's
Thank
watching
you.
here deep into the future.
Take
Great to have you
care.
on.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you. Take care.
Rabbi, did you see the article I sent you when we made matzah with your father, like in the 90s? Did you see it?
You know what? Let me go back and look because I missed.
I could resend it. It's very funny. Like that was our first experience with him.
Yeah,
I
if you
sent
don't
it
mind
to Shane.
resending it, because I don't know where it went.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then I'll yeah, it's very, very funny how I must have been like 4 or 5 years old living in Hollywood, and I guess he came to do some matzah bake event, and
Wow.
I sent it to Shayna. It's very funny.
Oh, you're here with a pic. There's a picture of you, right?
There's no picture, but it shows like my dad was there or something. Do you see it?
Yes. Now I found it.
How funny. It's very funny.
I actually remember this matzah bakery.
Were you there? You
don't
must
know
have been. You're like me and Shayna's age.
Yeah,
like
yeah. I was
maybe you were
probably
a little
there.
bit older.
No, I was probably there. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Funny.
Thank you.
All right. I'll be in touch with you if
Take care.
I do or go or not. I don't know what's
All right.
going
Listen,
on.
if you're here, you're welcome to join us.
All right. Yeah. I'll see
Thank
you. I will see you Thursday either way at the. I don't know if I'll
Awesome.
see you, but I'll see Shayna.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.